The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome. We will be starting the webinar closer to noon. We'll just let people trickle in right now. Thank you. Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining our What's the Deal with E-Cigarette webinar. Just some housekeeping. Please enter your questions in your chat box. We will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. I would also like to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded and will be archived along with the presentation slides on msdcenter.org. So now I'm going to pass it to Dr. Steve Kelder, who will present on e-cigarettes.
Great. Thank you, Veronica. Today we're going to talk about e-cigarettes, and I've titled this talk, What's the Deal with E-Cigarettes? I've met a lot of people that are concerned, worried, or confused, or just have some questions about e-cigarettes. So today my intention is to give you some of the basics about e-cigarettes. But first, I just want to mention that I work at the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living with a gracious grant from the Michael and Susan Dell Family Foundation. So thank you, Michael and Susan, wherever you are, for helping us do this. And the goals of our center have to do with children and families and promoting the health of both through research, through translating scientific evidence, and through disseminating what's known, and then also sustaining our center. So anyway, thank you to Michael and Susan Dell. And just want to start with, this is something I cut out of somewhere, I don't remember, about e-cigarettes. And you know, we are learning more and more about the harmful constituents, potentially harmful constituents of e-cigarettes. So this slide says there's no way they're dangerous unless I hope. And because e-cigarettes are a new product, and because we don't have ingredient lists in every single one of them, it's kind of hard to tell. Are they good? Are they bad? What's in them? And one could get paranoid pretty quick when you don't know what you're doing. So anyway, that's what this talk is about, to answer that question. So we are still in the middle of a public health debate about e-cigarettes, and it's been a very interesting contrast between those who are for and against that sort of divided many in the public health and tobacco control community. So just a brief overview that, you know, the debate has to do with the fact that the e-cigarettes, and I'll come right out and say it, e-cigarettes are less harmful than combustible cigarettes. You know, I'm an epidemiologist, and I've been studying public health for 30 years and can safely say that there's very few things you can do to yourself that's more harmful than smoking a combustible cigarette, with the tar, the nicotine, the carcinogens, as well as a long list of constituents which are found in the cigarette itself, and that are also created when when the tobacco is combusted. So there's a very definite harm reduction strategy and appeal to e-cigarettes in the sense that if we can get people to stop smoking this potently harmful, dangerous, carcinogenic cigarette and move them to something safer, then we can save literally millions of lives. And I do think that's true. That is true. However, there are still some potential harms related to e-cigarettes. And the thing that I study is children, adolescent, and family health. So there are some potential harms related to them. They're less harmful, but they're not harmless. In particular, there's nicotine in e-cigarettes, and nicotine is an addictive substance. And my worry is that children will be attracted to the colorful packaging, the really interesting advertising, and the multitude of flavors. There's thousands of different flavors, and kids like to experiment with things. So if they try these products, they will be exposed to nicotine. They might get addicted. So there's a downside to just being addicted to nicotine itself, and it differs based on how old you are. So when we're growing up, our brains are developing, and nicotine has, and I'll talk more about this later, nicotine has certain properties that fit well with our brain that can cause problems. So lastly, the long-term consequences of e-cigarettes are not well known. We haven't been using them long enough. So I was giving a talk somewhere, and someone came up to the audience afterward and said, well, when will we know for sure? I said, well, probably in 30, 40, 50 years. He's like, you got to be kidding. We can't wait that long. Well, we're going to have to wait that long to have conclusive evidence about the harmful consequences. But, there's a whole bunch of research studies which are going on that are trying to more carefully identify the harmful consequences. And I'm going to give you the update of what we know as of about January of this year. Oops. So this animation is not working right. I should say there's a report in 2018 which came out, and their overall message was e-cigarettes can't simply be categorized as either beneficial or harmful. We can't categorize them as beneficial or harmful at this state of time, even though I can fairly safely and confidently say they're less harmful than cigarettes, but they're not completely safe. And how can I say that? This is the report from the National Academies of Sciences. Came out in 2018. It's called The Public Health Consequences of E-Cigarettes. Public health consequences of e-cigarettes. If you Google that, it'll take you to the National Academy of Sciences website, and you can download this report right into your computer, and you could spend maybe a week, because it's a pretty thick report, reading it and understanding all of this, which I actually did. There's another report that came out in 2016 called E-Cigarette Use Among Youth and Young Adults, a report from the Surgeon General. If you Google CDC e-cigarette report, it'll take you to this website, and there'll be a whole bunch of information. You could download the report and spend another week reading it. There's a lot of pamphlets and easier to understand summaries of these reports if you go to these websites. And most of what I'm going to talk about comes from these two reports when I say that this is a summary of evidence. But this talk is divided into four main parts. We're going to go through e-cigarette basics. What are they? What do they do? We're going to talk about what's in e-cigarettes. We call it, it's not just vapor. We technically need to call it aerosol. So when you puff on an e-cigarette, you're aerosolizing the liquid contents that you're inside, and it turns into an aerosol that you breathe in. We're going to talk about the health risks, at least the ones that we know about today, and possible future ones. And then we're going to talk a bit about marketing tactics, because again, remember, this talk is about kids, children and adolescents. And I will say that most of the research that I do takes place in schools. And why? Because most kids are in school, particularly in elementary school. Like all kids are in elementary school, and almost all of them in middle school. And kids don't start dropping out until high school age. So you can learn a lot about kids just by finding them and talking to them, or talking to teachers and principals and parents of elementary and middle school kids. So I know plenty of principals that have a big box full of e-cigarettes that they've taken away from their kids in 4th and 5th grade, and even more in middle school, and a lot more in high school. So the kids are using these devices. So we'll talk about how many kids and what the trends are a little bit later on. So first, let's talk about the components of an e-cigarette. So if you've never seen one, if you only heard about them, this one's for you. It's composed of 3 different main parts. There's a battery, there's an atomizer, and there's a cartridge. And as this illustration says, it looks just like a cigarette. So there's a lithium-ion battery in the lower portion of it, where one would guess the tobacco is in a regular cigarette. Oftentimes there's a little LED light at the end that brightens up when you breathe in or take a puff on it. There's an atomization chamber, and that's where the what some people call e-juice or e-liquid is stored. And then when you take a puff, it takes the e-liquid, passes it by a coil, which is heated up by the battery, and then it atomizes the liquid and turns it into a smoke-like form, and you breathe it in. So that's what it does, and we're going to talk about each piece in just a little bit. So there's 3 main types. There's the cig-alike, and these are still sold. If you go to a gas station today, you can probably buy one of many different types of cig-alikes. They look just like a cigarette. You buy one of them. They're reasonably inexpensive, and they're disposable and can't be used again. So you just puff on it, and when you're done, you throw it away. Most advertising and people that I've talked to say that each cig-alike will deliver about a pack's worth, roughly speaking, of cigarettes. So it's like having a whole pack of cigarettes in one e-cigarette device. And people like them because, I mean, you don't have to light it, you don't have to put it out, it's not messy, and it doesn't smell like a cigarette. So if you're a kid, it's perfect because you can sneak away, take a puff, put it back in your pocket. You might smell like a mango, but you're not going to smell like nasty tobacco smoke. And so mom and dad or friends aren't going to smell you. Same thing with your car too. It might smell a little bit fruity, but you won't smell the nasty smell like you usually do that we many of us grew up with that are older than 25. So that's a cig-alike, and that was the early version. And people that use those, they didn't in many or most cases they didn't deliver the nicotine levels in the same way as a cigarette. So many cigarette users would try them and they just didn't like them because they didn't get the same buzz, they didn't get the same throat hit, they didn't get the same feeling from a regular cigarette. Later, as the industry advanced, there became the reusable ones with disposable parts. I should say the cig-alikes are still here. And they are the main choice for many kids, or were up until recently, to get because they are easy to hide, they're disposable, and they're inexpensive. Next are reusable systems. So they're more advanced, they're a little bit bigger. There's a broader variety of types of devices with it, and it might come with a cartridge that you can or a cartridge that you can just plug into it. So you'll buy the device, and then you'll buy a package of cartridges, and you'll just reuse the cartridges, or I'm sorry, rebuy the cartridges. So these are called an open system. They're reusable. They have a battery that's rechargeable. You charge it just like anything else. Just plug it in or put it in a laptop or something with a battery in it to do it. And then there's a bit more advanced of this type, and those are the kinds called advanced personal vaporizer or a mod. And it comes with a chamber that you can refill with liquids. So instead of buying a cartridge, you buy a little bottle filled with the liquids, and you put it in the chamber, and then it works just like the one I just described. These are a bit more expensive, and there's just an incredible variety of them. Some are big, some are small, but the main feature is that they have a chamber that you can refill. And oftentimes you go to the vape shops, which I'm sure you've seen because they're popping up all over the place, and you talk to someone about the different levels of stuff that you want in your e-juice. You can alter the type of flavoring, you can mix flavorings, you can have a little bit of nicotine, a medium amount, or a lot. So you have a lot more control with the APV versus the cig-alike and the reusable with disposable cartridges, which are more off the shelf. APV is usually, in our experience in surveying kids, not that many kids are using those per se, particularly because they're expensive and you get them from those vape shops. instead of convenience stores. So anyway, first generation I just talked about. Here's just a few pictures of them, different brands and such. Blue is a big brand. There's different variations of them. Some are called an e-hookah. They're a little bit larger, but the key is that they're disposable. Here's just a few more. Moving into the next level, those with the cartridge, I want to make a point here about one that's just come out in the last couple of years. It's called the Juul, and it looks just like a memory stick, and you can indeed charge it with your laptop, which is the picture that I just showed. And they come in different flavors. You can buy a package of them for $49. In some school districts, $49 is pocket change for some of these kids. In other school districts, it's a lot more expensive. So the use of Juuls is going to vary a bit by the school and the neighborhood and the community and their level of affluence to a certain degree. But for $49, you can get your introductory package. And so here's some of the flavors you can get. I cut this right off of their website. There's cream brulee, there's fruit medley, Virginia tobacco, cool mint, and mango. And one of the first things I want to point out to you is that if you look at the cartridges, and I had one right on my desk, there's very little or any product information on the cartridge itself. And this is what you see in these different flavors versus the device. In addition, if you look up here, and I know this is a little hard to read, so I'll read it for you. Each Juul contains 0.7 ml and 5% nicotine by weight, approximately equivalent to 1 pack of cigarettes or 200 puffs. So in the advertising, and I see this similar form of product information in other e-cigarettes too. But think about it for a sec. What's wrong with this picture? What's wrong with this? What exactly does 0.7 ml with 5% nicotine mean? In the research world, we generally talk about the nicotine content in terms of milligrams per milliliter. So at least there's a standard metric to understand it. And I believe this calling it 7.7 ml with 5% weight is maybe a little bit confusing, possibly misleading. But anyway, so what does that mean? It's hard to say. Is this a lot of nicotine or is it a little bit? So I want to tell you guys a few things about what it does mean. So I found this on a website where they characterize 0 to 3 milligrams, 6 to 12, 12 to 18. So in the packaged or the disposables and the packaged types of e-cigarettes, it can vary from very little to 12 to 18. Those are common metrics. Some of them will poke over into 24 milligrams per milliliter. So it's measured by this expression, mg per ml. Some of the liquid will come as high as 42 or 56 milliliter per ml. And if you didn't know anything about e-cigarettes, you could say, well, 0 to 3 doesn't sound like a whole lot of nicotine. And 56 sounds like a lot. But that's not exactly descriptive in a way that I find useful. So I started poking around. And while I was poking around, I found that last year, the European Union limited the amount of nicotine to 20 milligrams per milliliter. So remember, I just showed you that we've got 0 to 3, 6 to 12, 12 to 18, commonly advertised. And now the maximum in the EU is 20 milligrams. And then I found and took from a vaping website, which is talking about finding the right strength of nicotine. And this is what they said, that 0.3 is a very low, 0.6 low, 1.2 medium, 1.8 is high, and 2 is very high. So 20 milligrams. And that's the test for whether or not you can sell them in the disposable e-cigarette packages in the European Union. So that's what's considered the high end. So that gave me a little bit type of information to help make an assessment as to how much is enough. So I went and I found different types of devices and e-juices that were very low and medium and high and very high. And here's the EU. And here's the thing. The Juul comes in at 59 milligrams for milliliter. That's really high. In fact, that's the highest one I was able to find just by looking around the internet. There might be higher ones because I can't say I looked at every single one of them, but it's very high, and it's the most popular device used by teenagers. So we have a little problem here. Even though I said early in the presentation that e-cigarettes are less harmful than regular cigarettes, the Juul device is delivering quite possibly and probably more nicotine than a regular cigarette. So when the kids are taking a puff off of that, they're getting a significant bolus of nicotine, and they're reporting that you can catch a pretty big buzz from smoking a Juul e-cigarette. So I would say, and here's a conundrum: if you're a heavy smoker, the Juul might be the right thing for you. If you're smoking 1, 2, 3 packs a day, you might need the Juul to be satisfied. But if you're a teenager, you probably shouldn't start out at 3 packs a day, right? So we have a little problem, Houston, with the Juul device. So I started doing more poking around, and I found these are just Google searches when I search Juul and nicotine. Teenagers say Juul is a discreet way to vape in class. Talked to a lot of teachers and a lot of kids. They put them on a chain, put it underneath your shirt, and you can just vape in the middle of class. No problem. It doesn't smell bad. I've heard complaints from parents who say their kids don't want to go to the bathroom anymore because the kids are smoking in the bathroom and blowing big clouds of smoke. They don't smell like cigarettes, but people are nervous because they don't know what's in them. You can buy it through PayPal. A lot of people that purchase things will have a PayPal account for eBay and for other places. So you just buy them on a PayPal account and have them delivered on whatever interval that you want. Here's a website, the best 8 best THC cartridges on the market, and I found one for the Juul, and called a friend of mine in California who happens to know this stuff a little bit, and said yes, he did find and know about Juul cartridges which have THC in it instead of marijuana. I was not able to confirm that. I wish I could have, but other than a friend of mine, I guess, who was a stoner in California. But anyway, and then hash oil and Juul too. So here's a package picture that I did find using Google Images called a hood rat at 5% strength and marijuana at 5% strength. In Texas, we do not sell marijuana either medicinally or recreationally. So I couldn't find anyone who had Juul marijuana cartridges where I live. I just heard about it in California. So anyway, here's what the warning they say with the Juul. This product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. And then here's just some guy I found that I thought I would share this picture with you. Another form of advertising for the Juul. Before I get into addiction, there's a whole bunch of different kind of devices, and you can see the variety of them. There's many different varieties as you can imagine. And then there's a whole bunch of different types of e-juice. As I said, I think there's up to 8,000 different combination flavors. This one is called Unicorn Milk. This one is called Skizzle Ninja God's Milk, coming at 4%. Now we know what 4% means. That means a lot of nicotine. 1% means not that much. Serial Killer is another one that I just saw. And then the French Dude, Vape French Roast. Just lots of different kinds. Here's another one to the right of the little French toast guy with different apples on it. And I heard reports from younger kids in elementary and early middle school that say, well, it can't be bad for you. Look, it's just an apple fruit flavor. So kids are a little bit confused. Try to remember when you were a kid, or if you have kids, you know that some things sink in and some things don't. Here's another one, blueberry e-juice at 3, 6, 12, and 18 and 24 milligrams. Or here they are showing it at 30, 60, and 240 milliliter, not nicotine, but just the size of the bottles that they come in. But the nicotine, the mg per ml, milligram per milliliter is labeled, and at 24 is beyond the European standard. But you can get it at 3 if you want to do it. And I've met and talked to a whole bunch of people that start off at the higher level and then they sort of titrate down, just like trying to cut the number of cigarettes you smoke until they get to an easier place with your level of addiction so that you can quit. And so a lot of people say that's worked for them. Just want to make sure that you hear, I've heard at least, that nicotine is just as bad as caffeine. Well, no, it's not. There's a lot of reasons why. Read those reports that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk if you want to get the full answer on it. I also hear that it's just water vapor, right? It's vapor. Vapor comes from water boiling. It's water vapor. Well, no, it's not. It's contained for a variety of different things. It's propylene glycol, it's nicotine, it's the flavoring, and vegetable oil. Those are the four main ingredients in the e-juice. And the two of them to pay attention to is the nicotine level as well as the flavoring, because different flavoring compounds are shown to have different harmful exposures to a person's lungs. So if you look at that 2018 report, it's only 6 weeks old. Just a few of the conclusions. There's about 40 or 50 different conclusions from this report, but just a couple of them that pertain to kids. There is substantial evidence that e-cigarette use increases the risk of ever using combustible tobacco cigarettes among youth and young adults. So it appears as if that kids who do not use combustible tobacco, once they start e-cigarettes, that eventually they graduate to at least trying to use a regular cigarette. Now, these studies are still fairly new and young in terms of how long they've been operating, 3 years maybe, possibly 4 years. And measurement of e-cigarette use amongst kids is a little bit tricky too. So I'm talking about having ever tried a cigarette. You're much more likely to try a cigarette if you had previously tried an e-cigarette. So that means you might take you down the path of becoming a combustible user. The evidence is still not quite there yet. So this is speculative in the sense of like the whole population. Yes, you would expect that as the e-cigarette rate goes up, that the tobacco use rate would go up too. However, I would guess that that's going to be lagged by 3 or 4 years, and we haven't had 3 or 4 years with big numbers being measured just yet. So we're going to have to wait on the answer for this a little bit further. If we see a spike in combustible tobacco use amongst kids, then my hypothesis might be true. Well, here's another one. Among youth and young adult users who use or ever use combustible tobacco use, if they add in e-cigarettes, there's moderate evidence, that means there's some, it's going in this direction, but it's not conclusive yet, that e-cigarette use increases the frequency, intensity, and duration of subsequent tobacco use. That just means if you're a current cigarette smoker, you add in e-cigarettes, these are for kids, mind you, you tend to smoke more regular cigarettes. So that's a bit worrying too. And then there's insufficient evidence from randomized controlled trials that e-cigarettes are effective as a smoking cessation tool. Now, a lot of people could talk and will argue with me on this, and I will say that there is evidence from non-randomized trial that e-cigarettes might be effective. So the best we have is maybe they're effective to the highest quality evidence in RCTs, randomized trials, shows they're not effective. There are plenty of anecdotes out there that say, and this is with adults here, now I'm talking about adults, plenty of evidence that says that, anecdotes to say that will work. The jury is still out on this, so I wish it was a more robust finding and we'd feel more confident about talking about e-cigarettes, but today it's just not. From the CDC report a couple years ago, nicotine exposure during adolescence can cause addiction and harm the developing brain. The hazardous compounds that have been found in e-cigarettes could and do include formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, and acrolein, which are known cancer-producing toxicants. Nicotine can cross the placenta and is known to have serious consequences, fetal and postnatal development. And then during pregnancy, there is a direct relationship between combustible tobacco use, and the nicotine is the suspected agent in combustible tobacco that leads to sudden infant death syndrome, altered corpus callosum, which is that thick nerve that connects the two left and right hemispheres of the brain, direct link with auditory processing, which means that children have a slower onset of speech and have some difficulties early on in school, and even obesity too. So let me just say, if you're a pregnant woman, it's not a good idea to smoke e-cigarettes. Are they safer than regular cigarettes? That's not easy to say. It's really just not easy to say. I studied very hard the literature on this, and it appears as if it's the nicotine that's causing most of the birth defects and birth-related problems, but we haven't done the studies yet. I mean, how are we going to do these studies when it's brand new? We can't randomize women to smoking and non-smoking or smoking and e-cigarette conditions. However, what I will say is you can do this with mice. So you can't do it with humans, but you can do it with mice or other mammals that would simulate our own human response. And the evidence is pretty clear that it's nicotine that are causing these things. So it's not a far-fetched idea to say that nicotine will cause it in humans too. So if you're a pregnant woman, I I don't think you should smoke anything really, cigarettes or e-cigarettes. But I in terms of the harm reduction, I'm not certain you get as big a bang for the buck switching to e-cigarettes from combustibles as you do if you're just switching in general for other health issues like lung cancer. Your baby's going to suffer either way, I think, with combustible and non-combustible tobacco. Other things from the report is that youth and young adults are uniquely vulnerable to the detrimental consequences from nicotine exposure, including reduced impulse control, mood dysfunction, and deficits in attention and cognition. So now we're leaving pregnant women and going into kids who start to smoke. And remember, our brains don't fully form and connect, let's say, from a wiring perspective. The different parts of the brain do not complete themselves until about age 25 or so. So the younger you start becoming exposed to nicotine, the greater the chance that you're going to have problems with it. So that this is an issue for young people, like in sixth grade. They're 11 years old in sixth grade, approximately, even younger than that. So you're well into the way of your brain formation. And anyone who's hung out with kids, or remember when you were little, you have some issues with impulse control, and that's in part because our prefrontal cortex is the last part of our brain, which controls our reasoning and our ability to self-regulate ourselves. And that doesn't come online until a little bit later in our early 20s. So interfering or messing with that is what nicotine does. And I wish I could say more specifically what messing means, but it is a pretty complicated process. Here again, our rat models, our mice models help us understand this, and it does appear that nicotine is the culprit with exposing rats to this. So clearly, everyone knows that nicotine is addictive. Everyone knows that tobacco is addictive. That's why it's hard to quit. That's why once you do become addicted, you tend to want to continue to use it. And everybody knows that. There's not much debate. But I had to look a little closer at this and try and figure out why. So if you look, there's acetylcholine receptors in our brain. There's nicotinic receptors, acetylcholine receptors all over our brain, which have an action on cholinergic areas of the brain. And these areas control muscle movement, breathing, heart rate, memory, and motivation. So that's a long list of things that it is related to and has some control over. So that's why when we take I was a former smoker. I'll admit to that. I did that for 10 years. Both my parents died from smoking young because I was born in 1958 before the first Surgeon General came out. And prior to that, doctors would advertise tobacco in medical journals as being a health promoting thing to reduce anxiety and stress. So nicotine has this interesting property that will relax you when you're agitated, but when you're feeling a little bit either tired or depressed, you can smoke it and it'll bring you up. So bring you up and take you down, depending on where you are. It'll increase your heart rate, it'll increase your breathing. So anyway, there's a number of actions that take place, but the biggest one is the neurotransmitters and hormones that have an impact on all of these different brain neurochemicals, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, but bingo, it's dopamine, serotonin, and these other factors that mean that in particular dopamine is the main pathway for pleasure and reward. So nicotine causes a pleasurable response. You start smoking it and you feel good, you feel pleasurable. When you get addicted, you smoke to stave off the withdrawal symptoms. In that sense, it's just like heroin. People love heroin at the beginning of their addiction, and then they start getting sick when they don't have it. So they're in a perpetual state of feeling sick until they get more heroin. So it's not too far away with nicotine too, although it's not not quite as impactful. But in a health perspective, it's really damaging to smoke cigarettes for cancer and other cardiovascular disease reasons. So there's very strong biologic plausibility. These are words that we use in epidemiology, that nicotine is related to impulse control, deficits in attention and cognition, and mood disorders. Now, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you guys and say that it's a whopping big effect. These are modest effects. Somewhere, if you like statistics, in the range of 1.2 to 1.8 times the risk, so not quite double the risk, but the evidence is there and we can't ignore it, that nicotine has some impact. And if you smoke, you're probably a regular person, you're just fine in so many different ways. You might have a nagging feeling that, gee, I wish I hadn't smoked. Well, I wonder if I would be less impulsive, or I wonder if I had different levels of mood swings, or I wonder, there's a lot of things that a modest effect will still keep you very nicely functioning in society, but still cause you not to reach your full brain capacity and potential. And that, my friends, is what I'm worried about. So what's propylene glycol? It's a colorless liquid at room temperature. It's what's used as the base to put the nicotine in to heat up and then become atomized. And it's generally recognized as safe. Now, this is a technical term that they use in the food industry or in other type of toxicant industries. However, it's generally recognized as safe in cosmetics because the base of some cosmetics is propylene glycol. So you can smear it on your face and it doesn't do much. That sounds bad, doesn't it? Smearing your face. So if you put makeup on, some of it, a lot of it, lipstick included, will have propylene glycol. But we don't know about breathing it in. It's in a lot of food too. So people eat it all the time and it passes through the digestive system without any particular problems and is generally recognized as safe. But we're still churning through the literature, churning through experiments to figure out whether it's bad for you to put into your lungs. Our lungs are a whole nother organ set with a different set of properties, and there needs to be careful attention paid, and there is. So let me just say, there's a long list of things which are that have been found coming out the other end of a vape pen. So that's in the cloud, let's say, that you're breathing in. These are all the different things that have been found in e-cigarette aerosol or clouds, and those in yellow are known to be carcinogenic. The issue is how much. So it's tricky to say how much there is because it depends on the liquid you use, the vaporizer that you use, and how deeply you inhale and how frequently you inhale. So there's safe limits for these things, many of which I will say that e-cigarettes fall into the safe use category. They're not in that strongly related carcinogenic. So, however, it does depend on the type of things that you use. So it gets a little bit tricky to understand. What I will say is that the higher the temperature, the higher the voltage of the device, which means we're in those sort of aficionado devices that are more expensive, the greater the likelihood that you'll get an increased level of toxic exposure to these things that I just showed you. Yes, and by the way, so there's some engineers that were using the wrong cord trying to get e-cigarettes to explode, and they reliably got them to explode if you put different current levels into the batteries and do what you're not supposed to do. So follow the instructions. There has been a number of cases of e-cigarettes exploding. However, I would probably say there's a net gain in switching to e-cigarettes when compared to falling asleep with a cigarette in your mouth and burning your house down. So anyway, just beware. There's a number of photos. If you just Google e-cigarettes exploding, you'll see little videos of this case is blowing up in someone's purse. In this case, it blew up in a kid's face. But he survived, and he's still talking about it. Also, there's poison control issues. You can see over time there's an increase and a decreasing level of poison control issues. These are with little kids, like infants and toddlers and things, who just somehow find e-juice bottle laying around and they drink it. So moms and dads get concerned. The kid's not happy, might have some symptoms of nicotine poisoning, tachycardia, nausea, throwing up, and other things, headaches. And this typically was accounted to not having child-proof safety devices on there. And I will say the industry has done a reasonably good job at making the e-juice cartridges tamper-proof, as well as the bottles that you get. So we're seeing a reduction in the calls to poison control centers. But back in 2014, it was a little bit off the chain. People were saying, well, look at this, kids are getting them. One of my staff members found them empty cartridges, which still had liquid in it, in a daycare playground. So some dum-dum, I guess, just threw it in there. Anyway, so this paper just came out in 2018. They're trying to express how the relative safety of cigarettes and e-cigarettes based on a bunch of different types of things. So the green is ambient air. The light pinkish is a nicotine inhaler. Here we've got e-cigarettes, variable power, organic only. Here's one subset that was used in a particular set of studies by an investigator, Ganowitz. Here's the heat not burn devices here, which are brand new on the marketplace, or reasonably new, not quite yet in America, but in other countries. Tobacco smoke over here. So if we index at 10 to the 0 power, the relative cancer potential of tobacco, then you look at, as you go down to the negative exponent of it, this illustrates, it's a little hard to understand, but it does illustrate the relative safety. Some of these devices, those mods, which have variable power, and if you get the wrong one and you heat it too high, you're exposing yourself to those carcinogenic chemicals at relatively high levels that are almost comparable to tobacco use. That just means if you're smoking these things, know how to use your device, and don't drip on the coil, and make sure it's working properly, and make sure you charge it with the proper equipment. So here we're saying on the right, tobacco smoking's not good for you. Standing next to someone smoking's not good for you. They do have an assessment of the heat not burn. So in terms of harm reduction, heat not burn is less harmful than tobacco, but still in the ballpark of being harmful. If we go all the way down here, we can see that there's a variety of e-cigarettes, and most of them, in terms of cancer potential, are much safer than regular cigarettes from a cancer perspective. But remember, cigarette smoking doesn't just cause cancer. It's the number one cause of heart disease too, stroke, etc. So we still have to learn a lot more. I can't say they're safe. This clearly illustrates that they're safer, but not completely safe as regular ambient air. Okay. This is a bit more precise with regard to a few more different types. And so here we've got formaldehyde, acetylide, acrolein, and toluene, and tobacco-specific nitrosamines, carcinogen during the curing process. So just to make a long story short, not to get too deep into this, if we look at the comparison of toxicants emitted by tobacco versus e-cigarettes, we see that tobacco emits 9 times more formaldehyde. I make sure I'm reading this right. In terms of a ratio, there's less. There's 450 times less acetylide in an e-cigarette compared to a regular cigarette. 9 times for formaldehyde. So some are large differences where you can reasonably clearly say that e-cigarettes are safe in comparison to regular cigarettes based on these numbers, 380, 120. 9 and 15 is getting a little bit closer, and that explains some of this variation here down on the bottom. I'm not going to go into this too much, just to give you a peek at the types of studies which are coming out. This one compares cellular toxicity and levels of released inflammatory mediators. Inflammatory mediators is now talking about not just a cancer, but cardiovascular disease. So if you put some lung cells in a petri dish and you blow, if you blow e-cigarette smoke on it and you look at it by the different flavors, this is tobacco, this is pina colada, this is menthol, coffee, strawberry, and a reference. You can see that in terms of cell metabolic activity, that there's a difference. The whole point is that there's a difference based on the flavor. So here's cell viability. The cells die faster with strawberry than they do with a tobacco flavor. Interesting enough. So again, if you want to look this up, get the slides, and you can find that yourself from Tobacco Control a couple years ago. But just illustrates that different flavors have different potential harmful effects, and we're still trying to figure it out. In fact, a lot of manufacturers have voluntarily taken off cinnamon off of their flavor list because it turns out that's pretty bad to put in your lungs. It's cinnamon. So we're moving near the end here. Let's talk about marketing tactics. We're seeing similar marketing tactics to regular cigarettes. So you can just see that there's an appeal for adventurousness, freedom. There's a sex appeal sort of thing, blue in particular. Here we're going with menthol and sort of an African-American hip-hop theme. So anyway, kids are attracted to images like this. There are thousands of flavors. They're highly attracted to the flavors. We've done studies that say that they wouldn't even try cigarettes if they weren't flavored. So there are some discussions of limiting the number of flavors that are available through e-cigarettes to keep kids to not want them. And you can debate that plus and minus, but the fact remains that the kids are using e-cigarettes because they want to experiment with the flavors as much as the feeling, the buzz that you get from the nicotine. Anyway, I just want to put e-cigarettes in context a little bit. This is the 2000 data from the Monitoring the Future study. It's done every year from the University of Michigan, and it estimates the national rates of tobacco use. So here it is, 8th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade. About 10% of kids are users of cigarettes. That is, they answered the question yes when they were asked, have you used a cigarette or smoked a cigarette in the last 30 days? You can see that e-cigarettes come in at about 17%. So more kids use e-cigarettes today than regular tobacco combustible cigarettes. You can see that a sizable proportion are vaping marijuana. 8th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade. So 5% are vaping some form of marijuana in their vaporizing devices. Now, you put it right next to being drunk. So, kids like to drink too. Who knew it? So even as young as in 8th grade. So we've got almost 20% of kids, 20% of American 12th graders report having been drunk in the last 30 days. And if you look at marijuana use, it's even higher. And this is just ever use. So they puffed on marijuana in the last 30 days. So if you're trying to think about the relative problems of things, I would have to go with being drunk is a problem if you're a teenager, because you really do stupid things when you're drunk. It invites sort of the opportunity for unwanted sexual advances. There's drunk driving, there's fighting, there's all sorts of problems with being drunk at such a young age. Marijuana use, well, it's illegal for one. There's a whole host of studies which I can't get into, which you'll cite about why it's not a good idea to be getting high all the time when you're a teenager, particularly if you're in a training mode like high school and college. So I thought you might be interested in this. Just going to finish up by saying that there's a Family Tobacco and Smoking Control Act in 2000. We're still waiting on rules for how to interpret these things. So the regulation is in the pipeline, let's say, with regard to e-cigarettes, and there's opinions on all different sides. In Texas, in 2015, we said that the age of sale and the use on schools is not allowed with e-cigarettes. So here's a bit more things. Tobacco has the FDA has some authority over the constituents, so they could, if they wanted to, regulate the number of flavors and the amount of nicotine. I mean, they could say, just like the European Union, no more than 20 milligrams per milliliter. if they wanted to. And actually, I think that's probably a good idea. Why have such an addictive device out there? But the laws in Texas and in many other states are similar. This prohibits the sale, purchase, or use. Retailers must post a sign that containers must be child resistant. Retailer must supervise and train people to make sure they don't sell it. School districts, you can't do it anywhere in school. This is Texas law. So then here's some sample from a school district, for actually the school district my son goes to, Westlake. They put this in their handbook. If you want that as an example, you can look at this afterwards. And then finally, I mean, there is a penalty if you're caught selling to a minor. In this state, it's $1,000 per violation. I want to mention one last thing. If you work at a school or at a school district, or if you're a parent, my group, meaning here at the University of Texas School of Public Health, has created a program, an awareness program called Catch My Breath. That if you Google Catch My Breath, you're going to end up finding a song. I forget by who the woman's name is, but if you type Catch My Breath e-cigarettes, you'll find us at the Catch Global Foundation. And CVS Pharmacy has graciously agreed to support implementation of this program in any school that wants it. So call us. We'll give you this program. It's 4 sessions long. It's designed to tell kids about what we know and don't know about e-cigarettes, and have them have a conversation, hopefully get them to think twice before they use them. It's called Catch My Breath. You can get it free of charge as long as CVS helps us out. So thank you, CVS. So I just want to talk for a minute about what e-cigarettes look like. You might not know much about it. So do you believe that your kids, I call them knuckleheads, would want to do this? Does this look attractive? I mean, it's a whole group of people. This is a smoke blowing contest. These are happening all over the United States. So here's one. I mean, very big, thick smoke clouds. These kind of clouds are kind of hard to do with the Cigalikes and the cartridge thing. So that you need a higher voltage to be able to do this. So here's another one. There's contests for the type of smoke rings. I talked to a dad who said that, yeah, what's wrong with that? I'm buying zero nicotine for my kids. So dad told me he's going to a vape shop, buying his son these things. And his son is just sort of walking around and blowing smoke rings. And, without the nicotine, there is less of a concern. However, we still have the concern with the cell viability and other things of that nature. So we just don't know. I still wouldn't recommend it. But anyway, so there's some people dressing up and smoking. There's all sorts of different ways to sort of sexualize it. You can see on the internet and in advertising. This one too. So yes, that's attractive, to young men in this case. And there's one, advertises for women too. But here's the reality. Kids sitting in a car and just blowing smoke because they're kids and they feel like blowing smoke. So should we encourage that? Should we discourage that? That's the whole point of this talk. I find this one a little bit amazing. But could you believe a group of kids would do that? Well, probably with a case of beer, they might do that. I can imagine that too in different places. Yeah, I can imagine that as well. So in this case, yeah, that's a bit extreme. So I'm going to end here, and I hope you've been typing some questions in the Q&A part of it, and I'll try to answer your questions. But anyway, thank you all for listening to me and hanging in here for this long. There's a lot to talk about e-cigarettes. So if you have questions, just type them in the box, and I'll try to answer them. Oops, I see there's some. Let me get my glasses. One, are hookahs and hookah bars delivering the same substances? So I will say that there's a variety of different types of shisha or different types of tobacco and flavors that go into hookahs. So I'm not talking about those kind of hookahs. So it's sort of a misnomer when we call an e-cigarette device a hookah. It's just a name that they put on it. So it is different. And when you're in a hookah bar, you're usually smoking nicotine and tobacco and some other different flavorings that go into it. I will say that it's really easy to get an overdose of nicotine in a hookah bar. If you puff on it a lot, it delivers a very high bolus of nicotine and the carcinogens that are typically found in combusted tobacco smoke. So if you look it up, it's not healthy, that's for sure, smoking hookah in a hookah bar. Let's see, will you be sending out a recording of this? We're not going to send it out, but you can find it on our website at the Michael and Susan Dell Center. You can see some of the places here, msdcenter.org at the very bottom of here. We will probably put it up either today or tomorrow, so pretty soon. Yes, it is by Kelly Clarkson. Oh, you're right about that. Thank you, Omega. Are e-cigarettes taxed the same as cigarettes? Not yet. That's part of the regulatory process. So at this stage, to my knowledge, they are not taxed. Based on your experience, do you recommend e-cigarettes as a method of harm reduction strategy for tobacco prevention? No, I don't. And I say that because prevention implies kids, and I just don't think we should recommend e-cigarettes to kids. Because there's too much potential downside to get them addicted to the nicotine. However, in terms of tobacco prevention, I would say that e-cigarette prevention belongs right next to tobacco prevention programs. So if I were going into a school, I would talk about the dangers of combustible tobacco. I would be honest and say that e-cigarettes are less harmful than combustible tobacco, but they are not harmless, and you shouldn't do either one. So, and here's the reason why, that there's nicotine in e-cigarettes. So that's my opinion on that. Let's see. What about purchasing mail order e-liquids? Are there restrictions or reasons young people purchase them from out of state? Well, I've looked at a number of different websites, and really all you have to do is click and say that you're of a certain age, and then you'll be able to get them. So that's a little problem the industry, I think, needs to work out. If they don't want regulation, then they need to work it out. Sooner or later, it probably will become regulated. So yeah, that's why I said you can buy these Juul cartridges. You can get on the monthly plan, just use your PayPal and get it delivered to your house. So yeah, kids are going to lie about that. We know that. There needs to be better ways to tell. To Juul's credit, I did see in a new updated version, which came out last week on their website, that they have some kind of method to figure out if you're of age. I do not know what that method is. So if it works, then hats off to you guys at Juul. I do, Juul, if you're listening, wish that you would do a better job of letting people know how much nicotine is in your devices. And while clearly you say that there's a strong throat hit and a buzz that goes along with it, you guys are really high in nicotine, and I think you're great for the heavy smoker, but you're bad for the teenagers. So I'd like to hear more from you about what you're doing. And I notice you're toying around with the idea of providing schools with e-cigarette prevention stuff. So we probably should talk if you want to send me an email. Anyway, kids surveyed for e-cigarettes, e-cigs, beer, drinking. Are they nationwide or Texas? So the numbers I showed you were from the Monitoring the Future, and so they're national. In Texas, it's probably close to the national average, a little bit lower, a little bit higher. That's going to vary by community and socioeconomic status and other factors too. But I would say Texas has as big a problem as the rest of the country with e-cigarettes. Yeah. What would require for the FDA to require 20 milligrams like the UK? I could be really snarky about this question, but I'm not gonna. It just means that we need to have more politicians with the backbone that will agree that this is a problem, and it needs to go through the FDA regulatory control process. That usually is a very slow process. It's an open process in the sense that there would likely be a comment period, and individuals that think this is a bad idea would have a chance to have their say, and people that think it's a good idea would have a chance to say. But the authority belongs to the FDA to do that. Are there specific policy strategies you suggest in relation to e-cigarettes? Well, there's always lots of different policy actions that one can take. So if you're a local school, I would say let everyone know, post signs, and let parents know that, first of all, it's illegal to use in your state. maybe take advantage of this Catch My Breath program. It's free. We have a digital online platform. You can just start using it if you want to. Spend a little bit more time and energy as a policy in substance abuse prevention, not just e-cigarettes, but as I showed you, we need to talk about marijuana. We need to talk about alcohol with our kids, and research is very clear that if we can delay the onset of any of these substance-oriented behaviors, you have someone who's less addicted, less prone to be having problems with these substances. You make better choices if you wait a little bit longer. There's other policies. They could remove menthol from the list of flavors. You could do that with tobacco too. So there's lots of different things that could happen. It takes a long time. The policies at the state level, most of them are in place, which is restricting the age of sale to 18 and over. You could raise that to 21, I suppose. There's a number of places who are doing that, and also having it restricted at schools to make it outlawed at school. That's another statewide, or it could be a district policy along those lines. So yeah, there's a number of things that you could do. I guess we got 1 minute or one more question. All right, we're going to close up soon. I can't quite read the RU schools, no information, curriculum, or any mention about e-cigarette, barely marijuana, only mostly on other hard drugs. Would bringing a curriculum to school be beneficial, or just some of our youth mentioned too much exposure, make them actually want to try? That is a very good point. There is what's called unintended negative consequences of telling kids about it. And that's why I worry about starting prevention programs like in elementary school. You need to be careful when you're delivering messages across the age ranges of kids. So I think, we've done a good job of generally of creating general anti-cigarette, anti-tobacco norms, like smoking's yucky with little kids in kindergarten. You don't need to spend 6-week program with a kindergarten. You just need to let them know that no, you don't smoke. Adults tell you what's in charge. When they move into middle school and the reasoning capacity and the peer influence starts growing, then you need to talk about decision making. And you need to be careful not to make it look too much fun, actually, like I did with those pictures at the end of my talk. So yes, there's a problem with that. Most programs in the area of these sensitive topics, like regular tobacco prevention, alcohol prevention, HIV, STD, pregnancy prevention. If you look at the last 25 years of research, this unintended negative consequence really doesn't happen very much at all. You get a bigger bang for the buck in the prevention side, as opposed to stimulating someone for doing it. Where I worry most is with advertising, public health advertising campaigns, where you're exposing all kids or most kids to something, and it could go wrong if you start an ad that starts showing how fun it is, and then for 30 seconds, and then for 2 seconds you show you might get in a car wreck. So people have the different types of perception and looking at things. So that's where you need to be careful about what you put out in the airwaves. Anyway, that's about it for the time that we have. I appreciate all of your attention and time. We'll put this up online at msdcenter.org. And in a few weeks, when will it be?
March 27th.
In March 27th, I'm going to talk more specifically about the Catch My Breath program. So what is it? What is known about it? We've done a lot of pilot testing. So I'll tell you all the results to date about that program on March 27th. So anyway, I hope you all have a great day, and good luck to you all. And I'm glad you're interested in taking care of our kids. Thank you.